Hi, I'm Luke Mitchell. Today we will be talking about Call of Duty Modern Warfare, the newest title in the Call of Duty franchise, the 16th in fact. It is a pretty interesting game with interesting things to say, and we are going to be finding out exactly why this is also jolly interesting. But first, how did we get here? Call of Duty was released in 2003, another title in a veritable ocean of World War II shooters in the early aughts, but its focus on real-world events and unflinching Russian campaign made it more than just another war shooter. After a series of sequels tightening the formula and experimenting with a number of mechanics, the franchise ditched the conflict that made it a household name and started making up conflicts of its own. Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare was released in 2007 and changed the first-person shooter landscape forever, with complex themes, narrative depthness, and a multiplayer that remains the blueprint for online shooters to this day, and no doubt for years into the future. After COD 4, the franchise split, with the Modern Warfare series of games being developed by Infinity Ward and the Black Ops series of games being developed by Treyarch, along with a handful of standalone titles with their own internal universes. By 2016, the franchise had made around $15 billion, but there was nevertheless a sense of fatigue surrounding the Call of Duty mark. World War II was released in 2017, and while commercially successful, making $500 million in 3 days, its own attempt to hark back to the halcyon days of Call of Duty's infancy fell flat with some critics. Russ Frushtick of Polygon found that, quote, "Changing the time period so dramatically only helps to highlight how little has changed." Black Ops 4 was the last in the franchise before the announcement of Modern Warfare, an online-only shooter with its own fair share of controversy and questionable business decisions. At the close of 2018, the series was directionless, floundering, searching for relevance in a shooter landscape that had moved on since the late aughts. It needed some way of reframing the values, the context, the framing that had made the series so important in 2007, which is where Modern Warfare comes in. So, now we know how we got here, let's see what we got. I will now recount the story of Modern Warfare point by point for reasons that I hope will become clear. If you've played the game already or don't want it completely spoiled for you, I'll put a time code so you can skip ahead up here. Up here, or here, or here. Okay then. Curtain rises on footage of a gentleman who tells the player that this game has nothing whatsoever to do with religion. Activision's lawyers breathe a sigh of relief. Zoom out to men with guns and a guy climbing out of a van in Piccadilly, detonator in hand. Cut to black, titles. 24 hours earlier, helicopters over Verdansk, in Russia, obviously. American higher-up types bicker, mercenaries are moving chemical weapons into somewhere foreign-sounding, but Russian military are not to be fired upon for fear of creating an international incident. It is up to Alex to steal the weapons before the Russians get there. An airstrike is called in on the base housing the chemical weapons because this is still Call of Duty, remember, and we need to show off the fancy ray tracing in the first 5 minutes or the player base will get bored. Fighty, shooty to remind people how these games work before our heroes are ambushed and the chemicals are stolen by a third party who leave Alex alive for some reason. The bickering American higher-up types bicker some more. American army is told to go play by itself while the grown-ups talk. Laswell is told to unfuck the situation she has just fucked, and there is only one person she can rely on to help her. Enter Captain Mutton Chops in a classic Michael Bay standing up into the frame shot. London, and a black cab and a big red bus to help those who can't read. Carl Garrick of the SS complains about rules of engagement. A van explodes in Piccadilly Circus. Captain Moustache appears. Can't defuse a bomb locked to a terrified civilian. Sideburns throws him over a balcony. Everyone is saved, except for the guy thrown over the balcony. Garrick complains about the rules of engagement again. A terrorist cell named Al-Qatala, based in the foreign-sounding country from earlier, claims responsibility for the attack on London. Alex happens to be on the ground searching for the stolen chemical weapons. Captain Handlebars tells him to say his name to the local rebel leader there, she'll be able to help. Exposition happens, everyone hates everyone else. Alex needs Farah's help in tracking the gas. Farah wants Alex's help driving Russian forces under the command of General Evil out of her country. Russian soldiers are evil, blow up helicopters to create a distraction, storm an airbase, Dr. Bad's air force is knocked out temporarily. Back in Blighty, the cell responsible for the Piccadilly attack is tracked to a house in North London. Captain Price, yes I've run out of facial hair names, and Garrick storm the house, making tricky moral decisions along the way. A laptop in the house details the last known location of the Wolf, the leader of Al-Qatala. Alex and parody "Hoorah America, fuck yeah Marines" storm the hospital. Staff Sergeant Griggs is there because he was in the original Modern Warfare. Shooty shooty, bangy bangy, Alex captures the Wolf. They withdraw to the US Embassy for extract. Al-Qatala militants lay siege to the embassy. The Wolf has his "we are not so different, you and I" speech. Price and Garrick ride to the rescue. They are shot down. Modern Warfare is gritty, you know. Last stand at the ambassador's compound. Marines are jarheads. The Wolf is saved by his Al-Qatala chums. Farrar and Alex set up an ambush on the Wolf's only escape route. Long protracted sniping tutorial because all gillied up was a good level. Turns out Hadir stole the gas in the first place and used it against Al-Qatala, almost killing his sister in the meantime. 20 years previously, Farrar is saved from the rubble of a destroyed building. White helmet symbolism. Her father tries to save her. Russians are bad. Farrar and Hadir are captured by Barkov. Back in the present day, Hadir has disappeared. Avengers assemble. Hadir is tracked to the Wolf's stronghold, all the dynamic lighting. The Wolf is wearing a vest for some reason. He is killed, bomb disarmed, still no Hadir. Bickering higher up types bicker some more. Farrar's forces have been redesignated as a terrorist organisation because of Hadir's links with the chemical weapons. Alex commits treason. Price is just so goddamn relatable. 10 years earlier, Farrar is Barkov's prisoner. He waterboards her, she leads a jailbreak and meets a younger, even more dashing Price. Back in the present, Price and Laswell chat. Hadir has chemical weapons and means to use them on Russian soil. Price and Garrick go to St. Petersburg to stop it, meeting another series favourite along the way, and capture the Butcher, an Al-Qatala lieutenant who was coordinating the attack. They squeeze him for information on Hadir's location, using his innocent family as leverage. Kyle and Garrick search a stately home for Hadir in one of the finest levels in the entire Call of Duty franchise. Hadir is found where Barkov is making his poison gas. Laswell pulls the plug on the operation and hands Hadir to the Russians. We don't see him again. The gang reunite. Price has the intel, Farrar has the militia. They assault the factory. Alex sacrifices himself for some reason. Farrar kills Barkov in a helicopter that Nikolai is flying. Somehow, the factory explodes. Laswell and Price have a cuppa. Russia disavows Barkov. He was just one of the bad Russians. Sequel baiting. Fan service. The end. Now, you may well be wondering why I bothered recounting the whole plot in that way, and no, I have no intention of embarking on some awful cinema sins ding-a-thong. Amazingly, almost against all odds when you consider the Modern Warfare series' history and the state of the shooter landscape in 2019. But it's not quite the story that the reveal trailer is telling you to expect. Modern Warfare 2007's story was pretty great, dealing with weighty, even profound themes that military-themed shooters in 2007 hadn't even considered tackling. Nuclear war, Western involvement in the Middle East, the disconnect of waging war with modern technology, it is all there, and while it sits uncomfortably against the "America, fuck yeah" Uranus of some of its other sequences, they are no less potent critiques of warfare for it. It was unfortunately the high point in the series in terms of sober and sceptical discussions of geopolitical conflict in the early 21st century. Modern Warfare 2 and 3 failed to understand what really made their predecessors so great, choosing instead to rely on barnstorming plots, crass shock tactics, and a gritty modern aesthetic. In an interview for Hollywood Reporter, Joel Emsley, Infinity Ward's art director, says that, quote, "When you look back at the Modern Warfare series, there was crazy stuff happening and it actually ended up in an alternate universe." He's not wrong. Where Modern Warfare the first dealt with Russian ultranationalists and the threat of nuclear war in a near-future setting, Modern Warfare 2 and 3 completely crossed the Rubicon and featured the invasion of mainland USA and mainland Europe, the quote-unquote use of nuclear weapons as measured and reasonable tactical decisions, tales of revenge, etc. As Noah Gervais puts it, when you're destroying the same landmarks as Team America had done a decade earlier in the spirit of parody, you know that your story is losing touch with the reality that made it famous in the first place. Modern Warfare 2007 was certainly not an anti-war piece of media by any stretch, choosing instead to discuss its themes with a slightly raised eyebrow. Its sequels, however, were totally po-faced, down-the-line depictions of warfare that they thought was completely right and justified. "We just destroyed your Eiffel Tower, but hey, no need to thank America, Frenchies, all in a day's work." Modern Warfare 2007 actually tried to parse and think about what the term modern meant in Modern Warfare. The sequels merely understand it as meaning, well, in the modern day, I guess? Later on in the same Hollywood Reporter article, Taylor Kurosaki, Infinity Ward's narrative director, says that, quote, "Modern Warfare has always stood for being ripped from the headlines. It's always been relevant to the world we live in today." End quote. Well, Kurosaki couldn't have ripped more from the headlines if he tried with this most recent Modern Warfare title. It is set before the events of Modern Warfare 2007, so pre-2011, but really the similarities with events as they are today at the end of October in 2019, some deliberate, some happy coincidence, are striking. By my own count, there are overt references to the White Helmets, the annexing of Crimea by Russia, terrorist attacks in London, the events in Benghazi in September of 2012, as well as ones that simply couldn't have been made deliberately because of how close to the release date that they occurred, specifically the Turkish invasion of Syria and the abandonment of the Kurds, previously US allies until that point, on October the 9th, just over 2 weeks before Modern Warfare 2019 was released. While I'm nevertheless not sure whether all of this makes Modern Warfare any more relevant in today's political landscape, it was a wise move for the developers to invent a fictitious Middle Eastern country to serve as the centre point for its narrative and emotional heft. Urzikstan, much like the unnamed state in the original Modern Warfare, is an amalgam of Syria, Crimea, Iraq, Kuwait, the Lebanon, but Modern Warfare 2019 sidesteps any potential accusations of cultural insensitivity by, firstly, very explicitly ruling out religious motivations for the conflict in the first line of spoken dialogue in the game, and secondly, making a much more concerted effort to characterise and give a face to the normal, everyday people who live with conflict every day of their lives, in the characters of Farah and Hadir. Previous Modern Warfare titles tend to use Middle Eastern countries as backdrops for their conflicts, sandblasted skyboxes, lots of corrugated iron roofs and breeze block shacks, much like the US and Russia used the Middle East for their own proxy wars incidentally. What an odd similarity that is. As a result, Modern Warfare titles of old frame their conflicts from a Western perspective, using Western characters as viewpoints. Soap in Modern Warfare 2007, Private Allen and Roach in Modern Warfare 2, and Price in Modern Warfare 3. The only time the player adopts the perspective of a character who isn't Western is in, you guessed it, Modern Warfare 2007, when they see through the eyes of President Yasser al-Fulani, the leader of the nameless Middle Eastern country just before he was executed by al-Assad. In-game, al-Fulani has no agency, no power, able only to move his head and witness the horrors outside the windows of the vehicle as it drives him to his death. Middle Eastern perspectives, hell, even perspectives that are not explicitly American or British, with a few Russians thrown in for good measure, are completely sidelined, their lives being mere collateral, their voices drowned by the sound of gunfire and helicopter blades, their cultures reduced to the shifting sands and endless blue sky. In Farah and Hadir, Modern Warfare 2019 re-centres Middle Eastern stories and voices, pushing the Western characters to the periphery. They have agency, are the most mobile in the entire cast of characters in Modern Warfare 2019, for good or for ill, while the Western characters, to paraphrase a conversation between Farah and Alex, well, they go where they are told. Price, Garrick, Alex, Laswell, these people have no stake in Urzikstan's future or its people. Farah and Hadir, though they may use different tactics, are fighting for their lives, for their country, for their culture, and they are given very concrete personal reasons for their struggle. Their motives are not explained in exposited backstory either. Modern Warfare 2019 spends a lot of time with their younger selves in a level where their town has been destroyed by a drone strike. Playing as a young Farah, you have to fight your way from the wreckage of your home, the face of her dead mother dusty and broken beside her. "Please wake up, Mama," Farah cries. This stuff happens every single day in places all over the world. Farah's story is specific but universal. As Farah in the present says,
"We live like this every day."
Modern Warfare 2019 draws parallels between the macro-level struggle for survival of Urzikstan and its people with the micro-level struggle of family units fighting to stay together, or more commonly, being torn apart at regular intervals throughout its story. More so than I think any Modern Warfare title to date, Modern Warfare 2019 concerns itself and really engages with the cost of warfare to civilian life. Sure, we see civilians in previous games, but they are not nearly humanised or characterised as much. Damn it, Modern Warfare 2 and 3 turn civilians into targets for Pete's sake. Farah's mother and father are murdered on screen, and we feel their loss in Farah's desperate cries. In the embassy level, a man is murdered and his son rushes to his corpse, begging him not to leave, the boy's mother looking on helplessly from behind bulletproof glass. In the two house clearing levels, children are shielded by their mothers from soldiers invading their homes. You spend a lot of time shooting enemy soldiers in the Call of Duty franchise. You spend a lot less time being shown how far bullets can ricochet. Modern Warfare 2019 can't resist letting a few of those shots off closer to home as well, however. In the second level, terrorists with Al-Qatala attack Piccadilly, and as someone who has lived half an hour away from London my entire life, and has walked past that fountain countless times, and remembers the terrorist attacks in London in July 2005, yeah, that level strikes very close to home. We will all have different opinions on the level, and indeed previous similar levels in the Modern Warfare series, whether they are misjudged or not, whether they are exploitative or not. I can only go with the material I have in front of me. The Piccadilly Circus level is only controversial if you accept that Infinity Ward put it there deliberately to shock and nothing more, and I would give the studio more credit than that. The reason that sequence gets me the way it does is because it is just so raw, so visceral. The level is confusing both in terms of its design but also in terms of its presentation too. There is mass confusion, telling enemies from civilians is a difficult task. There is no clear way forward. The design of Piccadilly Circus itself, a circle with many exits branching off in all directions, runs against the received wisdom behind designing levels for first-person shooters. 1, 2, maybe 3 paths to take, but always forwards. There is no score to speak of, the only sounds are of the screams and gunfire reverberating off of the walls towering all around. There is never the sense that the player, or anyone really, is in control of the situation, that moment coming when Price makes his appearance and takes command. If Modern Warfare 2019 had just dropped the Piccadilly level in without in some way engaging with it on some level, then yeah, I'd say it was a pretty nasty exploitative thing to do. But they don't. The equivalent level in Modern Warfare 2, No Russian, sets up civilians as targets and gives the player plenty of clear sightlines to maximise the carnage. The car bomb sequence in Modern Warfare 3 is, mechanically speaking, a cutscene. The Piccadilly level isn't fun to play, its design being the antithesis of what the Call of Duty experience has been understood to be. Mechanically and narratively, the victory of defeating the level, for want of a better word, is a Pyrrhic one. It serves as an inciting moment for Garrick's character. "Look what they did to our home," says one of his colleagues as they fight their way through the smoke and burning cars. The West has had its share of horrific terrorist atrocities in recent years, and the threat of terrorism is one that people in the West live with every day. Modern Warfare 2019 recognises this, but I do not think it draws an equivalence between the admittedly rare acts of terror that we experience in the West and the atrocities that are a daily occurrence in countries all over the Middle East. This is referenced directly by Garrick. "They sent us in half-assed so everyone can just keep pretending that we're not at war." It is a frustration on the young man's behalf that he doesn't understand why other people don't see what he sees. It is a frustration understood only too readily by Farrar.
We live like this every day.
The Call of Duty series has never made a secret of its views of the American military and the armed forces in general. You only need to play the games and look at the framing. The actual real-world relationships between the people who make Call of Duty and the armed forces that they portray is one that is only recently attracting attention. Dave Anthony, the writer for Black Ops 2, was invited to Washington to join a panel of military experts to discuss the future of warfare. The Call of Duty Endowment is a charity focused towards getting veterans into stable work when they retire from the forces. The briefest glance at the end credits of any Call of Duty title will show you the number of military experts that they have on hand to provide technical advice and expertise to ensure the authenticity of the game experience. The makers of Call of Duty have to pay a fee to weapons manufacturers if they want to use their weaponry in their games. In an article with Eurogamer Ralph Vaughan, the man who negotiates such deals on behalf of Barrett, the manufacturers of a rifle that costs $10,000 and can kill a deer standing behind a concrete barrier 2,000 metres or 1 1/3 miles away, says that, quote, "It is hard to quantify to what extent rifle sales have increased as a result of being in games, but video games expose our brand to a young audience who are considered possible future owners." Now, I'm not saying that any of these things are inherently bad or good, these are just the realities of creating war media in 2019, regardless of the medium. They deserve greater exploration though, particularly the idea of the Call of Duty series as being a marketing opportunity for Barrett and Heckler and Koch, which is pretty yikes. It's enough at this point to recognise the historically symbiotic relationship between Call of Duty and the armed forces, and realise that when you look at Modern Warfare 2019, the messaging is a lot more muddled than we have grown to expect. Garrick's plot arc, such as it is framed by his frustration at being held back by rules of engagement that the enemy plainly don't observe. He just wants to take the gloves off and fight, and despite having actionable intel on the cell that had just blown up Piccadilly, the implication is that he wasn't allowed to move to stop the bombing. Contrast this with the scene after the chemical weapons have been stolen, where the army colonel is left in the cold as the operation is handed over to the CIA. He no longer has the clearance. Though neither conversation cancels the other out, individually they reveal the narrative priorities of Modern Warfare 2019 in the almost complete omission of the American military and the emphasis on elite special forces such as the SAS and the militia led by Farrar. In a marked departure from every other game in the franchise, the American army goes completely unrepresented in terms of player characters, the closest being Alex, a CIA operative embedded with a Marine team at the open of the game. And when they are represented on screen, they are just the kind of jar-headed oorah like whoa brah, I know brah, quarterback knuckle draggers that American high school movies have been making jokes about for decades.
Clean up on aisle 6! The whole field's crawling with HQ, dude!
Alex, pretty much the sole American representative in Modern Warfare 2019, is inconsequential to the plot in ways that previous Call of Duty titles wouldn't have dreamed of. He sacrifices himself at the end of the game for reasons that make no sense narratively speaking, but when you look at the almost total irrelevance of the American military in this game, it perhaps makes thematic sense. Despite what the Fallout series has been trying to tell us for the last 25 years, war has changed. 100 years ago, received wisdom was to conduct warfare by lining up in holes in the ground and killing each other until everyone died. A marked development on the army manuals from 100 years before that, which basically involved lining up patiently above ground and waiting for the enemy to murder you. If a war needs fighting, there will always be soldiers needed to fight it, sure, but in 2019, those battles are more and more fought digitally, remotely, information being wielded just as readily as M16s and AK-47s. In Modern Warfare 2019, the traditional military setup represented by the US Army is obsolete, replaced by smaller teams who can get in, get what they want, and get out quickly and at a moment's notice. Modern Warfare 2019 does represent a new direction for the series. I can't speak for the multiplayer because honestly I'm really not that into being schooled by 14-year-olds in my spare time, but from what I have seen it seems to be playing catch up in terms of what the Battlefield series has been trying to achieve, particularly with the most recent releases of 1 and 5. The original Modern Warfare in 2007 represented a complete shift in the design and narrative priorities of the franchise, and Modern Warfare 2019 mirrors that shift almost exactly, on a general level if not a substantive one. We know what happened to the series after Modern Warfare 2007. Will history repeat itself? I'm sure in 2 years or so we'll find out. Thanks for watching.
451. Let's rally up. Get to my house. Four, 5, 1. Let's rally up. Get to my house.